So the Xbox One X that we took apart has an extra screw. I guess they just included it in the box. It was just laying around after we were done rebuilding the thing. So this is our hardware news recap for the week. We have the big, of course, Intel and AMD combo item news, and some still pending stories about Raja Koduri's potential departure from AMD. We'll be talking about Backblaze reliability testing on their drives as they release annually at this point. And then some news from the DRAM side of the industry, where Samsung has apparently caught wind that, oh, actually there's limited memory supply right now. So they're going to start making more memory. So that took a little while, but that's what we've got this week. Before getting to that, this content is brought to you by the Thermaltake Flow RGB closed loop liquid cooler, which is a 360 millimeter radiator plus 3120 fans that are RGB illuminated. The Thermaltake rain fans at that. This uses a 4.5 Gen Azetec pump, which is one of the faster pumps. You can learn more at the link in the description below. So the first one's recapping a news story that we published on the website a few days ago. This is Intel and AMD working together to build a new mobile chip. So as the title of the article said when we published it, in other news, hell has frozen over. So Intel and AMD are actually working together. This is legitimate news at this point. They both released press releases, and basically what's going to happen is they're working on a new ultra thin product. So this should, if you kind of look at the specs, the power requirements, things like that, it should be able to outdo just about anything Nvidia can do at the same form factor. So if it comes together, depending on how many CUs are in the GPU element that AMD is providing, it could be a pretty powerful chip. And this is in addition to AMD's Ryzen Mobile announcement, where they already are sort of vying for more mobile and portable market share. So Intel and AMD working together. It's going to be using the Intel 8th generation Coffee Lake CPU for the foundation, and then we don't know exactly what Radeon graphics solution is in there yet, but we do know it is a Radeon graphics solution, and we do know it's using HBM2. We just don't know what the CU count is at this point. The GPU is still technically discrete, but it is integrated in a different way. So there will still be the IGP from Intel, and that'll still be on the Coffee Lake die. However, there's also going to be the Radeon discrete GPU, sort of, that's connected by EMIB, which we'll go over in a moment. And this will allow toggling between the two GPUs. So for low load video, encode, decode, watching YouTube at 4K, things like that, you use the IGP from Intel. And then for anything more taxing, you use the AMD Radeon GPU, which should help with power consumption concerns, but also still provide pretty hefty GPU compute capability that theoretically will be competitive with Nvidia, primarily at the form factor. So that's what we're looking at for the new collaboration between AMD and Intel. So then the new chip package will again be part of the 8th generation lineup, and it's going to combine a Core H-series processor with a custom AMD Radeon graphics solution with stacked HBM2. The silicon will be housed on one package or substrate and will use Intel's EMIB, or Embedded Multi-Die Interconnect Bridge, to share a power and communication framework. Anytime there are multiple chips or dies on one package, there's an issue of managing power, bandwidth, comms between them, and this is an issue that AMD's already pretty much solved with their Infinity Fabric, and it's unlikely that sharing proprietary technology is within the purview of this arrangement. Essentially, EMIB will allow for heterogeneous pieces of silicon to communicate back and forth. So this does a few major things. One is it eliminates the need to use an interposer, which you would need to do for example, Vega uses an interposer. That's the bit that the HBM of the core sit on top of, or the GPU die. So it eliminates that, which means that you're lowering cost, and it simplifies the packaging process. Well, there's new challenges in packaging, but it removes one step from the manufacturing process because interposer yield is also a concern. So that's eliminated, and EMIB also reduces concerns of running into the reticle limit when you're dealing with large monolithic dies. So it sort of modularizes and pieces out the different components of the CPU or whatever the component may be, rather than making a gigantic monolithic die where you, the larger you go with the die, the more you have issues with yield. So your yields go down, which means your cost to consumer goes up because your cost to make it goes up. You're throwing away more chips as a result of the lower yields. And also there are just technological lithographic limitations to how large a die can actually be when it's coming out of the fab based on the reticle limit. So that's a problem, and that's also resolved by taking this approach. It's very similar to some other things we've seen. Intel's been doing this with FPGA boards for a little while now, and AMD, of course, famously has introduced the multi-die solution to a product with Ryzen, and theoretically with Navi in the future. This looks to be the way of the future. Nvidia has released its own white papers on multi-chip modules and using them to resolve for lithographic limitations, reduce size of the individual die components, so then yield's not as big of a problem, and you can somewhat modularize the design, so you pick and choose the parts you want based on what the customer is, who the customer is. So it's really interesting. This Intel and AMD combo, I think, we'll see how it shapes out, but right now it definitely looks pretty competitive for the ultra-thin market, to the point where they're going to be able to reduce the size of the motherboard within the laptop, which changes a whole lot of parameters, one of which is the size of the laptops, of course, and it reduces about 2.9 square inches, and that means that you could either use that space for other things or you get rid of it and reduce the size of the laptop as a whole. So really cool stuff, something to pay attention to. We have an article on it on the website, and then I'll give a shout to Anantech, who have their own article on it. That's also pretty good and worth checking out if you are interested in learning more. This next story is still technically unofficial, so subject to change depending on, this may become official or maybe debunked by the time we publish, but looks pretty legitimate. So Hexus reports that it has allegedly obtained an internal letter from Radeon Technologies Group head Raja Koduri, and the letter allegedly states that Raja will be moving on from AMD with an indeterminate future in the industry. We don't know what he's doing next. We've previously worked with Raja Koduri, so we have, I think, 2 interview videos with him shot in their Sunnyvale, California offices, where Koduri talks about the future of big graphics solutions in general, including large-scale, much higher resolution VR, which was less a point about VR and more a point about achieving very high resolution graphics that are ultra realistic. So we talked with him about things like that, about the time scale for making those things. Raja basically said to me that his goal was, I want to be able to play, I forget what the resolution was, but I want to be able to play ultra realistic VR before I'm dead or retired. That was his goal. So it's a very ambitious goal. And if he leaves AMD and leaves RTG, it's definitely a big impact to the face of that part of the company, at least, to the RTG, the Radeon Technologies Group. Raja's a smart guy. The interviews with him, if you haven't seen them, they're worth going back and checking on our channel. Just search for probably Raja Koduri and you'll find them. But until we've got more confirmed here, there's not much else to say. But it does sound like Raja will be leaving the company, if he hasn't left already. And this follows the 40-day sabbatical that he took previously, which I think that number 40 that he uses, or it sounds like he's trying to use symbolically in the letter, I think that is the same number he gave me when we were talking about the future of VR or the future of super high resolution graphics. I think we were talking about 40 years in the future or something like that. So he's got an interesting fixation on the number 40 that, if you watch some of the previous discussions we had with him, it does sort of come together. So yeah, interesting news. We'll see if it turns out to be true or not. In our next story, Backblaze, an online data backup and storage service, has reported their reliability numbers for the last quarter. And Backblaze is responsible for backing up your files, business files, things like that. They buy thousands of hard drives, and they take careful note of who made said failed drive so that they can not buy those again in the future. So the newest study shows that it primarily focuses on large drives, including 10 and 12 terabyte drives. The first time they're looking at things that large. As a report for Q3 of 2017. As at most other cloud storage enterprises, they are moving to high capacity drives like these. And so far, they've deployed 1,220 10 terabyte drives and 20 12 terabyte drives, smaller sample size there. Of these drives, none have failed yet, with a combined, I guess they're actually getting towards 13,000 drive days in operation for those higher capacity drives. So they've had no failures with those just yet. The report does also suggest that there's a narrow gap between enterprise and consumer drives in terms of reliability. Backblaze found a difference of 0.1% between the two. I don't know what their error margins are, but generally speaking, that's pretty much within them. So 1.1 to 1.2% failure globally across all drives between enterprise and consumer. And then this is 2013 to 2017 cumulative data here now for drive failure rates put annualized. They're at 5% total for 3 terabyte drives, regardless of make and brand. 2% failure for 4 terabyte drives, 1.9% failure for 6 terabyte drives, and 1.1% failure for 8 terabyte drives. So going down for the higher capacity drives as we move forward. The next news item is a Threadripper block. This is a water-cooled heat killer block, and it's supposed to be a dedicated block for the Threadripper TR4 socket specifically, and it was originally targeted for a September release, but they were delayed for so far unknown reasons. The heat killer for Threadripper block will come in a few different SKUs, including one that has pre-installed RGB LEDs compatible with X399 motherboards. And as we've shown in previous content, full coverage blocks on Threadripper matter the most. It's the most important thing is to cover that whole IHS and get the heat away from it. So pay attention to that if you are buying Threadripper. So the next one, this one we've been asked about a lot. Leon Lee announced an Alpha 550 case when we were at Computex, and we showed it. We haven't seen it since Computex, but that is finally ready for market. It's basically all steel and glass. It's not aluminum for once for Leon Lee. They don't normally do peasant materials like steel, but they've done it this time so that people can actually buy it. And this is a bit of a departure from their styling because of that. It has 4 tempered glass panels enclosing the steel chassis, and then it comes with 3 120 millimeter RGB fans for the front, with the Alpha 550 also accommodating vertical GPU orientation via riser cables, also a big trend now, and offering radiator support in the front and the top at 360 and 420 millimeters respectively. And it's also supposed to come in black and white finishes, and will sell for around $240, which is very cheap for Leon Lee, but still pretty expensive. We're going to try and look at that one. I don't have a active contact with Leon Lee, I don't think, but we'll try and get it. Next one, Samsung. So Samsung is set to increase DRAM production, they say. According to a report published by Electronic Times, Samsung is currently unhappy with the DRAM market at present. Apparently, Samsung has been gearing up to bolster some of their semiconductor lines since early October, with mass production in mind for first quarter 2018. Samsung is the biggest memory maker in the world, and assuming the reports are true, it could mean that Samsung's increased output could disrupt the tight supply and finally dilute RAM prices a bit. Samsung's current plan would increase DRAM supply by more than 20% from their lines, and hopefully that actually happens, because right now, Paul has a video about this that's very popular for good reason. Right now, building PCs kind of sucks in some ways. This is why one of the earliest backbones of the site, of gamersnexus.net, before the YouTube channel, was posting PC builds sometimes weekly, always at least monthly, and those have pretty much stopped for the last several months. That's because memory prices are so high, GPU prices have been all over the place. So if we could just get one of those components back to normal, that would be great. That'd make it a lot more feasible to build a new system as opposed to try and part stuff out used. Last news item of the week is the Titan XP Collector's Edition Star Wars video cards. So some of you asked what I thought of the Titan XP Collector's Edition earlier this week when it was a 12-second teaser video, and I basically said, I have no thoughts until they reveal more. Well, they've basically revealed that they're Star Wars Edition cards. So if you're a major Star Wars fan, I guess the cards have that look to them. They're $1,200, so technically they're the same price as the Titan XP when it launched. That doesn't change the fact that the 1080 Ti is a way better buy for 98% of our audience, because if you're gaming, just get the 1080 Ti. And honestly, if you're doing that anyway, you're spending $700 to $800 on a 1080 Ti, you could probably spend less than the difference to the Titan XP and have someone mod it for you and do a pretty good job. But yeah, I don't really have any thoughts on this. I guess this probably partly comes down to limited competition, because it's just like, what else is Nvidia gonna do? They can rebadge the card and sell it for the same amount or more or whatever, and there's no reason for them not to, as far as they're concerned. So what was that Star Wars quote? So I guess if you like Star Wars, it's worth it.
On second thought, no, not really, no.
That's all for the news. A quick note on Xbox content we're working on. So we have some FPS benchmarks that are probably done by the time this goes live. It's the first time we've ever done FPS benchmarks for a console. We've got software for it that we developed in-house. Pretty excited about it. Definitely check back for that shortly, within the next day or so, if not sooner. And we also have thermals and power testing for the Xbox during those same workloads. Some errata for the Xbox content we published already. The frequency, the GPU frequency, is actually 1172 megahertz, not 1720. And the memory frequency, effective or actual memory frequency, is 1700 megahertz. So some original information disseminated by Luke said it was 1700 megahertz, but yeah, it's actually 1172. So just wanted to point that out, because I said 1700 as well, because I sourced from them, because we don't have a contact at Microsoft. So correction there, but still Polaris, still 40 CUs at 1172 megahertz. Is not too far off from 480 reference clocks, but it is definitely not higher than it. So a note on that. But we'll have benchmarks for this pretty soon, so check back. And as always, subscribe for more. You can go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly, gamersnexus.net for the articles, or store.gamersnexus.net to pick up a shirt like this one or a sticker. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time.